Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for Curated Tour number 7. My name is Dr. Georgiana Stangiu. I'm the museum curator, and this is the 7th episode of our Curated Tours series. Today, my guest is the museum's collections registrar, Miss Jessica Stevenson. And before we dive in, I would like to go over the Zoom etiquette. You are muted and your cameras are off because this curated tour is recorded. At the end of the session, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers in the chat box. Please put your questions in the chat box and we will try to answer them as we go through. As I said, my guest today is the museum's collections registrar, Miss Jessica Stevenson. The 7th curated tour is inspired by the Truth and Reconciliation report, and we hope to open a conversation on the topic of artifacts with cultural origins likely going as far back as the Northwest resistance, which led to the execution of the Métis leader Louis Riel on 16 November 1885. And we scheduled this curated tour around the date because the Métis Nation of Ontario observes Louis Riel Day on 16 November. As I said, our intention is to open a conversation in an attempt to properly identify this set of artifacts. Previous attempts to contact subject matter experts remained unanswered. And as you will hear from my colleague, Jessica, it is not certain that the objects were all collected during the Northwest resistance. Moreover, it is uncertain that they are all in provenance of the Métis Nation. We are hoping to find support and guidance to precisely identify the various groups where these objects originate. And before I hand it over to Ms. Stevenson, I will just say we will hear her presentation and then view the objects now on display at the museum, including a shotgun on loan from Fanshawe Pioneer Village, which is displayed in our related section of the permanent gallery. Ms. Stevenson.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Stangiu. So I have a presentation, I have a PowerPoint, so I will just pull that up here. There we go. And so this presentation is mostly a summary of the information that we know with a few photos so that I can explain kind of, as Georgiana was mentioning, kind of the discrepancies that we think might actually be about these items. So, there we go. So first, this is just kind of a collage of photos. This is not all the objects that we'll be talking about today. As Georgiana will show you in the display, there are a few more that are not represented here, but just a visual to get us started. So these items were found in the collection 2 years ago during an inventory project that we were doing. And at the time, the items had old numbers in a system that the museum doesn't use anymore. And these old numbers led us to a document in the museum's records that we refer to as a history sheet. And from the history sheet, we were able to determine some information about the item's donation, but there were pieces that were missing. So this is just a summary of what we kind of knew then from this history sheet. So we had the items were donated to the museum in 1961 by Angela Labatt. And according to Angela Labatt, the items were previously in the possession of Lieutenant Colonel Lawless. The assessed for the items at the time was circa 1885. At this point, they did believe that the items were all connected to Lawless's time in Saskatchewan during the Northwest Resistance. And the items were originally given the collective title of Plains Indian Medicine Man's Artifacts. And the source given for that identification was Dr. Wilfred Jury of Western University. As of October 2022, 18 of the 21 items listed in the donation have been located, and we are still currently in the process of looking for the other 3 items. So since that's not a whole lot of information, we've been kind of researching to figure out if we can fill in some of these gaps. And so where we started first was the 3 names that we knew for sure. So we knew Angela Labatt, we knew Dr. Jury, and we knew Lieutenant Colonel William Lawless. And so with a research project over the summer, we discovered that we can now say for sure that Angela Labatt's husband, Hugh, was close friends with William Lawless. They kind of ran in the same social circles. Hugh Labatt had very similar military service as William. And we know for fact that Lawless did stay at their house during a visit to London in 1938. And this was after he had moved to Massachusetts to live with his sisters. So there is the possibility that some exchange of items or artifacts happened at that time. We also know that Dr. Jury was the main curator for Western's Museum of Indian Archaeology and Pioneer Life, which is now the Ontario Museum of Archaeology, around the time of this assessment. So it makes sense that if the museum was looking for somebody at the time considered to be an expert, that somebody who is well-versed in Indian archaeology at the time would be consulted. However, some of the assessments that he made, according to this history sheet, we now take issue with. We have several questions. And so it's just kind of important to note that all the information that we have about these items right now was from an expert in 1961. And so because we have these questions, we're kind of, if they didn't come from the Northwest Resistance, when might Lawless have acquired these items? And so we put together a biography of Lieutenant Colonel Lawless, and his biography offers several opportunities in which he may have interacted with First Nation or Métis communities in Western Canada. So William Lawless was born in 1867 in London, Ontario, and by the age of 17, he was working in the Ottawa Hospital. In 1885, he joined the Field Hospital Corps No. 2 in the Northwest Field Force, and he spent approximately 1 month in Saskatchewan. So this is the time period that the history sheet originally attributes the collection of these items. But then we also know after he finished his service in Saskatchewan, he returned to Ottawa, and he joined the 43rd Ottawa and Carleton Battalion of Rifles, which was a reserve rifle unit. In 1899, he traveled to South Africa and fought in the Boer War. And then most importantly, after the war, in which he served as first lieutenant of D Company, the Royal Canadian Regiment of Infantry. That's his connection to the RCR. So we have a number of other Lawless related items in our collection that specifically came from Lawless himself or his service. And that's the reason why he is in our collection as the RCR Museum. After the war, he remained in South Africa, which is important because that puts a significant period of time in which he stayed in South Africa. And I'll explain a little bit about why this matters when I go through the items. And then he returned to Canada in 1907. And then he lived in Ottawa until sometime between 1911 and 1913 when he moved to Winnipeg. And then as a staff adjutant, he took several trips to Alberta and Saskatchewan to fulfill his duties. So between roughly 1911 to 1914, there was a number of trips that he took out west. And we have no concrete information about the communities that he may have encountered during these trips. And then in 1914, he joined Lord Strathcona's Horse Battalion, and he went overseas. He was wounded twice in the war and eventually assigned to 52nd Artillery Battalion in 1916. In 1918, he moved back to Canada, and then he moved to London, where he stayed until 1935 when he moved to Massachusetts. 1947, he dies. And so as we can see, over the course of his life and his military career, there were several times when he was out west. Some of these times he was in Saskatchewan, some of these times he was in Alberta. And we also know that he spent several years in South Africa. So these are some of the items that are on display. And these are some of the questions that we have. As we know, the Northwest Resistance had largely to do with the Métis population at the time. And so some of this beadwork, we have questions about whether it might be beadwork representative of Métis origins, or maybe it's beadwork representative of a different Indigenous group's history. We're not entirely sure. And we hope to get some more answers on that in the future. These are some buffalo horns, which does fit sort of with the period and the geographic area. And then we have some rattles. Now these rattles, Dr. Jury did not attribute the significance of these rattles. He had just labeled them bird rattles. But these rattles are of interest to us mostly because the aesthetic represented here doesn't seem to fit with the aesthetic of some of the groups that are geographically located in Saskatchewan and even into Alberta. Some of the aesthetics represented here fit more with Indigenous groups that are seen along the west coast of Canada. And so we have questions as to whether these items would actually be from Saskatchewan, or whether they would have maybe traveled from somewhere else and ended up in Saskatchewan, in which case these items might not culturally be from Saskatchewan at all. These are some more rattles. Again, Dr. Jury didn't give much context as to how he decided that these were death rattle and birth rattle, which is another thing that we hope to kind of learn as we go through this process. This is a deer or buffalo hoof rattle as well. This does seem to fit with similar objects from communities that are in that kind of area of Canada. But again, we're not 100% certain. This is a penis sheath that appears to be made of some sort of hide or skin material with, again, that beadwork. But the beadwork doesn't seem to fit with what we know culturally of Métis beadwork. But of course, we would love to find out more from somebody who knows that kind of expertise. And these are two examples of trade beads. Now, these are some other items that Dr. Jury appears to have gotten incorrect in his assessment. So the beads on the left here that are made of glass, Dr. Jury had attributed them to dogwood berry beads, but these are not organic in nature at all. These beads are actually made of glass, and it's even possible that they might be in a Venetian style that was very popularly used as a form of trade currency with the Hudson's Bay Company. So the Hudson's Bay Company would have used that in conjunction with numerous Indigenous communities, and it was not necessarily specific to one group in Saskatchewan. And then the black and white trade beads on the right side, Dr. Jury had attributed as wampum, but to our findings, wampum is usually two different sorts of shells, and these beads are not, they don't appear to be shell in composition at all. So we're not quite sure the exact history of these beads. They require further research, but we're fairly certain they are not wampum. And then this armband on the left, as you can see, was made of bone and beads. The history sheet attributed it to goose bone. This armband is not on display. As you can see in the photo, the bone is extremely fragile. So for conservation sake of the item, we just did not put it on display. And the bracelet arm rattle on the right, Dr. Jury had attributed to seeds or dried nuts. But in my research, I think they might actually be dried cocoons. Some Indigenous communities use dry cocoons as a form of rattle, and then they would string them together to make kind of like a noisemaker that you could put on your arm or your ankle. And this particular style of cocoon, to me, my research, I was finding it to be more common from African communities. So indigenous communities, possibly in South Africa, are around that area geographically of Africa. And so there's not an insignificant chance that this item is not even from North America at all, which, as I mentioned before, Lawless did spend several years in South Africa. He may have traveled, he may have encountered different groups, and so there is the possibility that this item is from Africa and is not from North America. And that's the end of my presentation, concluding what we know and what we don't know.
Thank you, Jessica.
I will, oops.
I think you have to stop sharing.
Yep, there we go.
Thank you. So here I'm back on display in our permanent gallery. I'm going to turn the camera so that we can focus on the artifact. And this is our little display. Title, Join the Conversation. And we hope there will be many who would want to join the conversation and help us better situate all these artifacts and identify their cultural origin. So let's start with the trade beads and the glass trade beads over here. Then we move on to the arm rattle and the chest cloth in velvet, plus the buffalo horns. And on the second level of this display case, you will see first the rattles. They're very, it's very beautiful work on these rattles. They have all sorts of anthropomorph and zoomorph and floral motifs. I would like to show you this side of the rattles, and then we are going to move around just to see the reverse. And here we have the ceremonial birth rattle. It's identical on both sides. And this is just beside it, a ceremonial death rattle. And let's go to the bird-shaped rattles. I hope it is visible enough so you can see the nice ornaments using paint and various motifs on the bird looking like shapes. And a little bit of the back of that one, yes. And finally, here is a medicine pouch with very nice beadwork. It's deer skin, and you can see the beauty of the beading work, the beadwork, the colors and the detail. They are very beautiful. And the penis sheath, it's the back of it. Here I can show you better this side. And finally, the hooves rattle, deer hooves, just over here. I promised you that we will go on the display case and look at a very interesting item, which we think it is related to the Battle of Batoche. And I'm going here very close. It is a Harris and Sons muzzle-loading percussion gun. You can see it over here. It is purported to have been in use at the Battle of Batoche, 9-12 May 1885. Of course, we only know that according to this handwritten note on the gun. And we also find out from this handwritten note that it was collected and donated by William D. Mills, Sergeant William D. Mills of the 7th Fusiliers, which is the local infantry regiment that was deployed with the Northwest Field Force in a logistic capacity. He was the company sergeant major. They did not participate in battle. And the Holy Sons was the firearm commonly used by Métis and First Nations during the conflict. So it is possible that this weapon was collected indeed at that during that battle. However, it would be nice if we were able to find out more about how Sergeant Mills might have collected it. What we know is that he was very active with the with all the veterans of the Northwest Field Force. And perhaps this is what determined him to donate the weapon to Fanshawe Pioneer Village sometime in the 1980s. At that time, our museum was probably not even set up for public visiting. But anyways, the fact is today the weapon is on loan from Fanshawe Pioneer Village, and it sits here in our section dedicated to the period in the permanent gallery. And finally, just to complete our short presentation today, we have, in addition to the Northwest Field Force, we have placed an insert about Louis Riel, who was the leader of the Métis, and he surrendered to Middleton at Batoche, to General Middleton, who was leading the Northwest Field Force. He stood trial for treason in Regina in Saskatchewan, and after an eloquent speech dismantling his own lawyer's defense on grounds of insanity, Riel was found guilty and eventually hanged on 16 November 1888. Although he has been recognized as a father of the Confederation in 1992, his execution remains a contentious issue. Also, while researching the topic for the exhibit, we have come across this photograph of the Métis prisoner from the Northwest Resistance. And this photograph can be found in a Library and Archives Canada collection. It was taken by O.B. Buell. Also, in this small display, we have the portrait of Poundmaker. And this is a watercolor and pencil portrait made by Alexander Campbell, who was also a member of the 7 Fusiliers of London, who went to Saskatchewan in a logistic capacity. So this watercolor portrait can be found at the University of Saskatchewan University Archives and Special Collections, A.S. Morton Funds. In the manuscript, an account of the advance of the 7th Fusiliers of London to aid in the suppression of the Northwest Rebellion, 1885. I hope you enjoyed our little small episode of the curated tour. And as we are coming close to the end of the year, I just want to say that this series will come to conclusion in several weeks, a couple of weeks actually, on the on the 6th of December with a conversation about the Battle of Hong Kong. Thank you very much for being today with us, and we hope to see you again on the 6th of December.